Okay, guys, today we're going to be looking at indicator 1.3, and 1.3 is really going to be about the Declaration of Independence and the American Revolution. So, with that being said, let's get started and let's get into the Declaration and the American Revolution. So, the Declaration of Independence. What is it actually? Well, if we really look at it in a um, unique way, we realize that the Declaration of Independence is pretty much a breakup letter with the King of England. And of course, that king is King George III. Um, what it's going to be saying within the Declaration, it's going to be listing the abuses that England has done to the colonies. And of course, it's also going to address those ideas that were presented in the last lesson of John Locke, the ideas of natural rights and justifying those natural rights, that the colonists are entitled to those rights of life and liberty. Um, and it was also used sort of as a piece of propaganda to persuade the colonists to cut their ties with Great Britain. And so when does this take place? Well, the Declaration is signed, of course, on July 4th, 1776. So you definitely want to write those down. We also want to make sure that we get our learning objective questions, and I will go over them at the end of the lesson. But the first one would be explain the Declaration of Independence and its purpose. Okay, so with that being said, let's move on to the next one. Let's talk about some of the stuff in the beginnings of the revolution. And when we look at that, we know that the First Continental Congress is going to meet in 1774. 1774, the First Continental Congress is going to meet. At this point, the colonies are not thinking about breaking away from Great Britain. They're more into trying to address the problems that they have with Great Britain. But in 1775, the first shots of the revolution are fired at Lexington and Concord, and you definitely want to write that down. That was in 1775 in Massachusetts at Lexington and Concord. Of course, this is often referred to as the shots heard around the world. So once the war begins at Lexington and Concord, the Second Continental Congress is going to meet, and this time they've got a different agenda. This time they're going to create a militia army, which is going to be made up of, mainly farmers and regular everyday people. But they're going to eventually form the Continental Army out of the Second Continental Congress, and this is going to be led by George Washington. Along about this time, a pamphlet's going to come out called Common Sense. This was written in January of 1776. This pamphlet was written by Thomas Paine, again encouraging the colonists to rise up against England, encouraging them to seek their natural rights. In that pamphlet, they're going to blame the king for everything, accuse him of being a tyrant, and they're going to avoid any type of compromise with England and push for independence. A couple of major events of the war, major battles of the war. The Battle of Saratoga is often considered the turning point in the war. Saratoga, of course, is in New York, and it's considered a turning point because once the colonists win this battle, it's going to encourage the French to offer help to the colonists, which they didn't have before. This is also going to be huge because the French Navy is going to be brought in, which the Americans did not have a Navy at that point, and they're going to bring in supplies as well. Now, there are a lot of other major battles. I want you to know a few others that you might want to write these down too. Of course, in South Carolina, there were two. The Battle of Cowpens, which is considered a turning point, as well as the Battle of Kings Mountain both of these battles in South Carolina are going to cause the British to eventually leave South Carolina, which ultimately takes them to the final battle of the war, or it's not really the final battle, but it's the one that pretty much seals the deal for England, and that's the Battle of Yorktown. Once the British retreat out of South Carolina, they make a march back to the sea, trying to hook up with the British Navy, but they're going to be surrounded at Yorktown. The French are going to bring their navy in and block off the British Navy from being able to rescue the British Army that was in the South. And once this happens, George Washington is going to swoop in and eventually defeat the British Army that's there. So the colonists win. Battle of Yorktown, last major battle of the American Revolution. Shortly after that, in 1783, a Treaty of Paris is signed, which officially ends the war. So the Declaration of Independence ideas are going to go into practice once all of this happens. You're going to see gradual emancipation of slaves, mainly in the North, some in the South, but mainly in the North. The idea of freedom of religion, more religious tolerance is going to happen. And then, of course, protection of citizens, all after the war is over with and the Declaration of Independence can pretty much go into play. Now, with that being said, that's pretty much it for this lesson. A couple of things that I would like for you to write down as far as your learning objective questions. I'd like for you to know the purpose of the Declaration of Independence and explain what its main use was for. I would also like for you to talk about some of the early Revolutionary War events. I want you to explain the early Revolutionary War events. And then the final thing I'd like for you to do is explain the ending of the war and how the Declaration of Independence ideas are put into place. So please write those down, jot those answers down at the end of your notes. And that's going to do it for 1.3. Hopefully you're a little bit more familiar with the Declaration of Independence and some of the major events of the American Revolution. And we will be moving on to 1.4, where we talk about the beginnings of our government with the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution. I'll catch you guys on the next one.